Hello everybody. Okay, we're going to jump right into now the circulatory system. So, apologize, my voice is a little bit gone. We've been sharing a little bit of a cold running through my family. So, if I need to mute myself for a minute, blow my nose or anything like that, that's what's going on. So, talking about this circulatory system, we're going to talk about the main functions. We're going to talk about some of the circuits, kind of where the blood goes, a lot about the heart, more about the heart, kind of how the heart is actually beating, how it does that, as well as then some of the specifics of the structural components of the vessels. So, overall functions, a lot of these we've already seen when we talked about blood in general, right? So, functions of the cardiovascular system, we're looking at obviously transport, the nutrients, the hormones, everything that goes through the blood, removal of those waste products, specifically carbon dioxide we're talking about, but also a lot of other waste products. Think about a big one is going to be lactic acid. You'll talk about this more in biochemistry when we go through a process called glycolysis in order to produce a substance called pyruvate to then send that into other cycles to produce ATP or energy. If there's not enough oxygen there, so if we're working out really intensely and we're burning, we're doing a lot of glycolysis, burning up a lot of glucose, then we get lactic acid. Lactic acid then can sit in the muscles, it can mess with the pH value, so we need to actually clean that out. As well as when we exercise, we move, when we do things, we get micro tears in our muscle fibers. And that's what, when it comes to, muscle repair and that kind of stuff, like we saw in a previous lecture, that we get leaking of products and waste products that we need to then clean out. Gaseous exchange, the oxygen and carbon dioxide, which we already looked at. Immunity, we looked at in depth. Of course, the blood vessels are where everything goes through, and then the heart is what pumps the blood through all the vessels. This is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the heart, then we're going to talk about arteries and veins, then we're going to talk about capillaries, just briefly. All of this you're going to cover again and more in depth in Physiology 1. But so what I want you to understand now, heart stuff is super, super important when it comes to these courses. The heart stuff is going to come back a lot. So we really want to make sure that we start now with a solid base, okay? And we'll get into all of the specifics, like arteries versus veins versus capillaries, kind of what they do, all that kind of stuff later on. We're going to look at two different, what we call circulatory systems, or two different circuits. You have the pulmonary circuit, which is literally just when the heart sends blood to the lungs themselves, and then it comes back to the heart, rich with oxygen. And then the systemic circulation, which, goes to the brain and goes to the rest of the body, that actually, fuels the rest of our body. So we'll mention those a couple of times. Pulmonary circuit to lungs, systemic circuit to the body. Specifically, when we'll look more into the anatomy of the heart, this will make more sense. The right side of the heart is receiving the oxygen poor blood. This is not to say that it is completely used up of oxygen. As a matter of fact, the percentage of oxygen is still rather quite high, but it has less than, the ideal 98, 99, 100% saturation of oxygen. So that comes into the right side of the heart, then it goes through the lung circuit, picks up all the oxygen, drops off the CO2, and then re-enters the left side of the heart, and then gets pumped to the rest of the body. Just another picture kind of going over that. You have the pulmonary stuff, everything like that. One thing that I do want to note right in here, arteries, this is a very important distinction. Arteries always, always, always take blood away from the heart. Veins always, always, always are bringing blood back to the heart. There's a specific set of arteries and veins that seems a little bit backwards, and I want to make sure that we point those out because that's almost always a test question. So the odd ones out when it comes to veins and arteries. These are our pulmonary veins and pulmonary arteries. These are the vessels. Let's do pulmonary veins because it's a vein carrying blood towards the heart, and because it's an artery carrying blood away from the heart. Most often we associate veins being deoxygenated and arteries carrying the oxygenated blood. This is the only instance where that is not true. So the pulmonary veins, we'll talk about arteries first. The pulmonary arteries are going away from the heart, so this takes blood. Actually, let's see, takes deoxygenated blood from the right side of the heart to the lung circuit to get oxygen. Okay, so these are the only arteries that carry deoxygenated blood. And then on the opposite side, the veins, it brings oxygenated blood from the lung circuit back to the left side of the heart. So just want to make sure we know these, because these are going to come up several times in the future courses as well, just because this is an easy question that teachers like to try to trick you with, talking about, okay, which the pulmonary veins versus pulmonary arteries, which one's carrying oxygenated versus deoxygenated blood, because it's unique and it's different. Okay, talking about the heart as a whole, I want to point a couple of things out. We're going to talk about the base versus the apex. We're going to talk about the four chambers of the heart. We have atria and we have ventricles. We have a bunch of valves. We'll talk about AV valves versus semilunar valves, and another structure called the cardiac fibrous skeleton. So starting with general shape and structure, the base is kind of opposite. The base is the superior portion of the heart, okay? And the apex is the inferior portion of the heart. So if we talk about something is that located at the base of the heart or the apex of the heart, this is what we're talking about. The base of the heart is bigger, it's wider, it's a little bit flatter. So that's why it's called the base. The base is where a lot of our big vessels are located, okay? Our aorta, our pulmonary vessels, pulmonary vessels over here, our superior and inferior vena cava, specifically the superior vena cava. All of these are located at the base of the heart. Okay, talking about the four chambers, starting with the atria. We'll look at a picture of all of these really quick, and then we'll jump back. So we have right side. Our heart is it's kind of mirrored. It's similar side to side in the fact that we have a right atrium and a left atrium, a right ventricle and a left ventricle. There's a couple of differences between both of them, but overall they're similar, which is why they carry those similar names. So the atria have thinner walls compared to the ventricles because they don't have to do as much work. Okay. The right atria specifically is going to receive blood from the vena cava, however you want to pronounce it. And it's actually going to be, there's two vessels. They have an inferior and superior vena cava / superior vena cava. Again, there might be a couple little cuts and breaks in this video just because I am on full-time dad duty right now, and I don't have another time to record this video, so we're trying to get it out. Okay, so we have a superior inferior vena cava. The vena cava, again, however you want to say it, these are our big veins that bring the blood back into the heart, specifically into the right atria. Okay? So this is what we're talking about, the right atria, right atria. So we have the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, bringing the blood into the right atrium. The left atrium receives the blood from the pulmonary veins. So let's make that connection. The right atrium. Atria is the plural, atrium is the singular. So the right atria getting blood from the systemic circulation, the left atrium is getting it from the pulmonary veins, and this is our pulmonary circulation. We can take this a step further if we want to think about test questions. So the right atrium receives deoxygenated blood. And the left atrium receives oxygenated blood. Again, that's because of those specific veins where, remember, the pulmonary veins are that one exception. So we want to make sure that we remember that in order to remember this kind of information. Okay, so those are our atria. Next, the ventricles. The ventricles are these part down here, the bottom portion, closer towards the apex of the heart. These have much thicker walls. They are much stronger than the atria, and we'll find out why. Specifically, the left ventricle is the thickest / most muscle of all of the parts of the heart. The left ventricle is the most. And when we talk about blood flow a little bit, I'll mention why, as well as next trimester, specifically in Phys 1, you're really going to dive into the heart, why each component of the heart is the way that it is. So think about the atria are the receivers, the ventricles are the distributors. They push the blood out. So I guess that right there answers the question of why it's thicker. They have more muscle because they're pushing the blood out of the heart, pushing it through the vessels. So they need to apply more force to get it through all of that space. So the right ventricle distributes blood to the lungs. The left ventricle distributes blood to the aorta, which goes to the whole body, and that is our systemic circulation. So right ventricle, pulmonary circulation, left ventricle, systemic circulation. You can think the atria and the ventricles are actually opposite when it comes to which part of circulation they're either getting or giving blood to. Here we go. Right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle, and eventually I'll cover the exact path blood goes all the way through once we finish up a lot of the anatomy of the heart. This is just another picture that I included. This has a lot of information, a lot of the different components of the heart. This is more kind of anatomy type stuff, but all of these things, all of these components are very important to understand. The superior vena cava, typically you would also see an inferior vena cava that we would see coming up from the bottom just like this. That is our inferior vena cava that both meet at the right atrium. We have these different components. Auricle, remember auricles is similar to ear, or that AUR, that hour, just like when we talk about in anatomy, like the auricle or the auricular surface of the sacrum is kind of ear-shaped. That's what we're talking about, like this little ear-type shape. All these different vessels, the ascending aorta, arch of the aorta to the descending aorta. We have the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary trunk. We'll go over exactly what those are a little bit later. So after the ventricle, after the chambers, we look at the valves. The valves, understanding and naming the valves is super, super important, especially for the future, because knowing and understanding the valves and what their jobs are and what they're in between and what they connect really tells us a lot about pathology and things moving forward. So the job of the valves is to maintain the single direction or the unidirection flow of blood through the heart. And there's two types. There's AV valves, or atrioventricular, also known as cuspid valves, and there are semi-lunar valves. They're called atrioventricular because they separate the atria and the ventricles. Or they're called cuspid because they are made up of these thin flaps of tissues, which are called cusps. So AV, cuspid, that's the valves that we're talking about. Or semilunar, and that's because their shape resembles a crescent or a half moon. I personally don't really see this, but that's why they call it a semilunar valve. Sometimes the early history of anatomy, the people naming stuff, didn't always do the best job, in my opinion. Okay. Continuing. So looking at each of these valves, again, I want you to know, you need to know the names and what they connect. So the right AV valve connects the right atrium and the right ventricle. This is also known as the tricuspid valve. Tri being 3, so it has 3 cusps in the valve. The left AV valve, which connects the left atrium to the left ventricle, is also known as the mitral valve, supposedly because it looks like a mitre hat of a bishop, like in the Catholic Church. Again, I don't really see it, but that's why it's what it's named after. Or it's also known as the bicuspid valve because it has 2. A little trick to thinking into the future when you're talking about the lungs. Always remember that the right side has 3. So the right side has the tricuspid valve. The right side also has, the right-sided lung also has 3 lobes. So 3 lobes on the right lung, 3 cusps on the valve on the right side. And those are our AV or atrioventricular valves. Then we have the semilunar valves. We have the pulmonary semilunar valve and the aortic semilunar valve. Again, I don't really see the semilunar shape, but I'm sure somebody did. And if you cut it a certain way, I'm sure somebody sees it that way. So the pulmonary semilunar valve connects the right ventricle to the pulmonary arteries. So blood going into the pulmonary circuit. The aortic semilunar valve connects the left ventricle to that ascending aorta, which goes to the rest of the body, or the systemic circuit. And I'll go over the full flow of blood in another slide. So there is another structure. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do the flow of blood now. I think it fits a little bit better here. So following along with me, blood enters the heart. I should say the professor that I took these slides from doesn't go over the blood flow a whole lot, but it is very important, and I think it does help kind of tie everything together. So it's important to understand when we talk about blood flow. When we talk about blood flow, we are always going from high pressure to lower pressure. Okay? That's the way blood wants to flow. Going from a higher pressure to a lower pressure. So that is not to say, I should clarify, we change pressures within the heart in order to maintain that rule. I don't want to get too deep into that in this discussion because it's a little bit more in depth. than what you need to know at this point. But we will get there eventually. So I'm not going to go too deep into that. Just keep that bit in mind. Apologies, the cat was torturing my son. Okay, so blood starts coming in through the superior and the inferior vena cava and enters into the right atrium. There isn't a valve or anything that stops this. This is completely pressure driven. So the vena cava, although the pressure in the vein side is really, really low, the right atrium is even lower. The right atrium blood will flow through the tricuspid valve, also known as the right AV valve, into the right ventricle. The right ventricle will then push blood through the pulmonary semilunar valve, and it enters into a structure called the pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary trunk splits into the left and the right pulmonary arteries. It goes to the lungs, does its thing, gets oxygenated, drops off the CO2, and then it comes back through the pulmonary veins. Now it enters the left atrium. From the left atrium, it goes through the left AV valve, also known as the mitral valve, aka the bicuspid valve, and goes into the left ventricle. Finally, the left ventricle is going to squeeze and push the blood through the aortic semilunar valve into the ascending arch of the aorta, into the arch of the aorta, I should say the ascending, specifically just the ascending aorta, and then into the arch of the aorta, and then finally to the descending aorta. Yes, bud. You want a pouch? Okay, let me wipe your nose. Come here. We can go get your pouch in 1 sec, okay? Okay, so that is the whole overall flow of the blood. Again, don't give too much time into this. This just kind of helps us understand a little bit these different structures and how they interact with each other. I think it's a little bit helpful. So, continuing, we have this other structure called the cardiac fibrous skeleton. Now that we've talked about all the chambers, we've talked about the valves, we have this fibrous skeleton. It's made up of dense connective tissue and collagen. It's located in the central region of the heart, surrounds the valves. It essentially, what it does is it isolates the atria from the ventricles. And we'll see why in a little bit. It provides support for the valves and the great vessels. It anchors cardiac muscle, gives a place for the cardiac muscle to really grab onto. And it also helps to insulate between the atria and the ventricles to make sure that electrical signal follows the correct path. We have a little bit of vocab. Annuli fibrosae are the parts that surround the valves themselves. The trigona fibrosae are the triangular parts between the valves. Valves are also called annuli. Annuli just means a ring-shaped object, structure, or region. So we look at this, correct myself there real quick. The annuli is the fibrous part that surrounds the valves, so it's circular, ring-shaped. The valves themselves aren't annuli. Okay. Sorry, there's something stuck on my face. Can't seem to get it off. Okay. So here we can see the annuli fibrosae, this part that immediately surrounds the vessel, and then we have the triangular pieces in between that connects all of the annuli, and those are our trigona fibrosae. I have a little bit of a better picture right here. You can see the rings themselves are the annuli, and the in-between parts are the trigona. Here's just another picture with each of those individual valves: pulmonary, aortic, mitral, and tricuspid. Here we go. So one of the cardiac skeleton's big jobs is to insulate the atria from the ventricles. And that's because the electrical signal in the heart needs to be really, really controlled so that we get a very controlled contraction of the heart so that the blood goes exactly where we want it to go. So the way that the heart works, it has these modified muscle cells. They're known as autorhythmic or pacemaker cells. These are cells that they have been made, they've specialized, become a little bit different so that they can actually develop their own electrical output signal, their own what we call an action potential. You're going to go way deeper into this in Physiology 1, but this is a really, really good starting point. You'll actually look and see it's due to these special channels, these special little membrane channels called funny channels, or these little funny sodium channels. You don't even know that right now, but you'll see that in the future. So specifically these autorhythmic or these pacemaker cells, these modified cardiac muscle cells, are located in 4 very specific spots. The SA node or sinoatrial node, the atrioventricular node, the AV, or also known as the AV node, a structure called the bundle of His, also known as the AV bundle, or these other structures called Purkinje fibers. The biggest one to know is the SA node, because in a healthy heart, that's where we're going to be looking every single time. When you get more into pathology, then you start looking at the other structures. So signal starts in the SA node. It goes through these structures called the internodal tracts, which connect it to the AV node. AV node is connected to the bundle of His. The bundle of His is connected to a structure called bundle branches, and the bundle branches are then connected to structures called Purkinje fibers. Here's what this all looks like. The SA node starts the signal, and it sends it out, and it connects to the AV node. AV node is connected to, right here, the bundle of His. That splits into these bundle branches, and then the bundle branches eventually turn into Purkinje fibers. You need to know the pathway in generally of this. Again, we'll dive way deeper into this into Physiology 1. Just seeing kind of the beginnings of it right now is going to be helpful. Try and remember this as much as you can. It means you'll have less work in the future if you can remember this here. So again, SA node to these internodal pathways, to the AV node, through the bundle of His, bundle branches, and then Purkinje fibers. And this is, again, the reason for this fiber skeleton. Because if you think, we want all of this to be timed. Electrical signal running through is then going to determine, or the electrical signal that goes through results in contraction. So you want the contraction of the heart to be very, very controlled. It's like for up here, for example, the atria. We want the atria to squeeze from the top towards the bottom, kind of like, like you're milking something. So you squeeze, and it goes like this, like squeezes from the top and goes down, so it can push the blood along. So we want this contraction to start at the top of the atria, and we want the contraction to start at the bottom of the ventricles. So we want contraction to start at the base and at the apex. And so in order to do that, we isolate the atria from the ventricles, so that way the signal doesn't get to parts of the heart too early, so we can control exactly how it contracts. And that's where part of the job of this fibrous skeleton. So this is where we're going to end this first chunk of the video. That's all of kind of our big, gross anatomy. Then we're going to get into a little bit more of the actual cells and tissue side of things, which is the micro anatomy of the heart in the next part. Again, thank you so much for watching, you guys. Don't forget to like the video. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. And again, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, drop them down and I'll respond as quick as I can. Have a good day and good luck studying.